2022. Just before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge that Centre for Projection Art acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'm coming to you from Bunurong country, and I'm sure that we've got people from throughout different places within Australia, and feel free to make acknowledgements in the notes. I'm joined tonight by a wonderful group of people. Eleanor Scicchitano who's coming to you from Adelaide, along with Henry Wolff and Jody Haines, who's in Melbourne. I think you're in Wurundjeri country, Jody, if I'm not mistaken.
Bunurong.
Yeah. Cool. And Eleanor's our 2022 curator, and Henry and Jody will be feature artists, but I will hand over to Eleanor in a moment to talk about that in a bit more detail. I'd like to thank the artists and curator Jacob Tolo for the amazing work and effort that went into Gertrude Street Projection Festival 2021, which was actually meant to be Gertrude Street Projection Festival 2020. Both Eleanor and Jacob submitted curatorial rationales at the end of 2019. So this announcement of Eleanor's curatorial rationale today has been a long time coming. The artworks, the 2020 festival was impacted by the pandemic. It was impacted by the pandemic again. And if you haven't had an opportunity to jump online to Gertrude Street Projection Festival's website, which is gspf.com.au, I strongly recommend you do that, where we've tirelessly, through the efforts of our volunteers and board, who are also volunteers, who've documented the works in video in situ as they were meant to be seen on the street. So you can actually see all of those works. And if you are in Melbourne and still in lockdown, or in Sydney or any other place in Australia or around the world, and just want a bit of culture and to see a bit of projection art, please jump on. You can go to all the artists' pages, and they've got videos of their works and also audio descriptions of all of their works and their what they were trying to achieve with their works. So yeah, massive thanks to Jacob Tolo for his curatorial rationale and for the perseverance of the artists, and of course my team as well. My team, who are mostly volunteers. We couldn't have done this festival without you. And Tegan, if you're out there listening, and I know I always point you out, but we wouldn't have even had the website if it wasn't for you, and you do this all for nothing. So thank you, you're amazing. So on that note, I just wanted to hand over to Eleanor, who has an amazing curatorial rationale, which we were very inspired by back when I sat down with the Creative Advisory Committee in November, December 2019, and we'd read through it, and everyone was delighted by Eleanor's curatorial rationale, which then didn't have a title, but I will pass on to you and you can announce all of that right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The title only happened about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Naming things is my least favourite thing to do, so I think we're quite lucky we just snuck in with a title for this announcement. Okay, so without further ado, I thought I would just read the rationale, because it's a statement that's been honed over time, and then we can elaborate on that afterwards. So the 2022 Gertrude Street Projection Festival, we've named Wild Spaces, and it will bring together artists from around Australia to celebrate and explore radical softness as a form of power, strength, and resistance, and as a political weapon. Coined in 2015 by Oregon-based writer, visual artist and poet Laura Mathis, the phrase radical softness as a weapon explores the idea that showing up and embracing emotion can be seen as a political act and a challenge in a society that prioritizes stoic strength. In 2022, the windows, walls, and dark corners of Gertrude Street will be transformed into bold and unapologetic displays of emotion and feeling. Artists will be asked to embrace the strength they find in their softness, to bring these private feelings into the public space and to create wild spaces in which we are free to explore how we are feeling. The program will tap into a growing conversation around emotions and their expression, resistance and protest, creating room for discussion between artists and audiences. So that's Wild Spaces, all about radical softness and emotion and feeling, which is very exciting.
Thanks, Eleanor. We're really excited about it. I think, yeah, definitely the history of Gertrude Street really lends itself to the title Wild Spaces. And the few artists that I've kind of talked to over the last year have been extremely excited about the Curatorial Rationale. So I'm having this really long lead time, which we've never had before, into a festival with artists knowing about the Curatorial Rationale and being able to really think about it and make applications through the open call is going to be really, really exciting to see what people come up with.
Yeah, it's and I think it's quite a broad idea, I guess, that's sort of it's quite topical, but also it gives a lot of breadth and scope to artists to bring something quite personal to their work. And I quite like the idea that we've got these buildings that are rigid and solid, and I mean, we hope they are rigid, solid, they're built on sort of right angles, and then being able to sort of populate that with this quite free movement and free expression and light that can sort of spread beyond those quite rigid boundaries, I think is an interesting, and placing those feelings and emotions in a public space, whereas normally we are expected to be stoic. We don't cry in public. We don't, especially certain members of society, like we can't get angry without being judged quite inappropriately and harshly for it. We can't sort of express ourselves in that way. So being able to take over that public space and make it a very public, a public display, I think will be quite interesting and exciting.
Yeah. Great. Do you want to introduce Jody and Henry, who are, of course, our feature artists for the festival, and maybe talk a little bit about why you've approached each of these wonderful artists to be part of the program?
Fantastic. We might start with Jody. So I was introduced to Jody's work at the sort of end of 2019, beginning of 2020. A friend of mine and I were talking, and she mentioned Jody. So I immediately went home and started Googling, and found, I think Jody's practice is really interesting. She's been involved with the festival before, so I think it'll be interesting to bring her back in this new way. And Jody is a photo media artist. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little. But I was also really interested in Jody's practice and her social practice approach to the creation of her work. And I think that lends itself quite beautifully to the idea of radical softness. So Jody, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be part of this and be invited along. Thanks.
And Henry Wolff, who's also based in Adelaide, where I'm also based on Kaurna country. Henry works in video and photography, and I have known about their practice for a number of years now. And again, I was quite interested in the way that that Henry works a lot with collaboration and a very empathetic way of working. And again, I thought that lent itself quite nicely to the rationale. So welcome, Henry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I've been introduced to your work, Henry, through Eleanor's introducing you to the festival, and I've got to say, yeah, your work is beautiful. Like it's quite moving and quite beautiful. And Jody, I've followed your work for quite some time, along with the rest of the festival cohort. So particularly liked a piece that you put up on Instagram just in the last couple of days with the superhero cape. I thought, wonder if she can wear that tonight.
I totally should have.
Opening night 2022, that's your outfit.
Yeah.
Superhero cape. I have a cape we can match. It'll be great.
I have a series of them, so it'll be fine.
Oh, great.
We need to talk about this off air.
Yeah.
I love that.
Knowing it is Henry and Jody, it's probably very early to ask you what you're going to do for the festival, but what are your initial thoughts around Eleanor's curatorial rationale and the provocation of what it's actually going to bring to, or some of the top of mind thoughts of what you're thinking for the festival?
After you, Jody.
Thanks, Henry.
Okay.
I think it's a really beautiful premise to kind of look at those ideas of radical softness and how that becomes losing my headphones, sorry, how that can become a site of resilience and resistance. So in terms of the thing that came immediately to my mind was looking at bell hooks and ideas of resistance as a site of radical possibility. And so these ideas of emotion being out there, creating space for emotion to be shown in all its levels is a site of radical possibility of changing things, of looking at new ways of existing and communicating and coordinating and all those wonderful things that we're learning now that we're in COVID. We have these new ways of existing, new ways of reaching others. So I think it's a really beautiful way to start thinking about what other ways we can use our emotions to create those sites, and like whether that be love or sadness or happiness or all those plethora of things. Yeah, so that was the thing that came first to my mind. And yeah,
I think I found, I don't know if this is a bit off topic, but thinking about that idea of COVID and isolation and new ways of thinking and expressing ourselves, I have found in the past, since the pandemic started, I am far more willing to talk about vulnerability and to tell people, no, I'm sad today, please just don't. Like normally I would be quite, public face, got to be upbeat, whereas I think this has really, taught me that, yeah, actually we can just be sad sometimes, and that's not a bad thing. That's just something you have to work through. So I think
totally. And we've learnt this whole kind of blur of the boundaries of what is our private and our public spaces. I mean, we're inviting people into our intimate environments every day now through the screen. So it's only it feels like a natural kind of progression to sort of also invite them into the intimacy of your emotion.
It is an interesting thing to position that so strongly within society, those kind of conversations, but placing it in the public zone. I think that for myself, within that kind of context of like wild spaces, that it offers this kind of potential for like works that kind of ask for an autonomous kind of space to be developed as a result of that allows that kind of vulnerability, the love, the care, and all of that to kind of exist publicly, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree. We are being invited, and unfortunately it does come down to a pandemic, but we are being invited to be a lot more vulnerable and show that. I even know, like with my kids are in high school, and like that, they, rather than calling the roll at the moment, they do well-being check-ins every day rather than calling the roll. And it's just, and if they've because it's all remote at the moment, if they've clicked a, I don't know what they're clicking, if it's a number or a face or whatever, they've actually had calls from, the school saying, what can we do to help you? Like, are you, what can we do to make your day better? That kind of thing. So there is acknowledgement, I think, with us being, we don't have that human connection of being able to, hug people and do all those things that we used to be able to do. And I think the one thing that we really miss is that human interaction of being able to do simple things. You have all these well-laid plans of going out for a drink or celebrating with. I have one night to celebrate with the Gertrude Street Projection Festival 2021 team, and it was like just this madcap, like, let's just try to get people together and go have a quick drink and celebrate what was. And by the next week we were in lockdown again. So it's been a maddening time, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to present a whole street festival again next year, or if we don't, we've got some amazing learnings from what we've done this year. And I think one of the things that we will continue to do with the Gertrude Street Projection Festival ongoing is do this amazing level of documentation that we've done this year, and getting all, having all these webinars and doing artist insight videos and that kind of thing, just so that people get a bit more of an understanding of actually what goes into contemporary projection art, that it's not just, pretty colours on a building and that kind of thing. It is actually, does actually have a lot of meaning to it.
Yeah. Henry, I think your focus is a little different, isn't it, that we've been talking about?
Oh, yeah. Because recently I developed a work that was considerably focused on kind of care as a foundation for the kind of movements, for the way that we shot it, for the way that it was presented. And I had a couple of philosophers from the UK that wrote an essay in response to it, that really they drilled into this kind of idea of like a non-romantic love as a kind of way of acting ethically and morally towards one another. And as a result of that, it's something that I hadn't really necessarily thought that I would jump into, but love as a kind of thing to lean into as a concept and understand how that can kind of guide a work. Because I've always spoken much more within my practice of empathy as the kind of guiding point and the kind of the thing that is built into every part of the process towards making a work. But it was this kind of repositioning, this re-understanding of empathy as actually being an act of love for another, for yourself. So I think that that's becoming a strong kind of starting point for me. And it's going off in weird ways at the moment. But I'm excited to see how, I guess, particularly in that context of like soft forms of power, how like things that we kind of like, particularly like I've shied away from that because it's something that I feel uncomfortable with, I think, in some senses. But like knowing that we can take that kind of uncomfortability, the vulnerability that's inherent in that kind of act, and reposition it for a dialogue around what's happening in our work right now, how are we sharing these spaces, how are we sharing our own experiences, and how does these subjectivities that are all happening at once kind of coalesce in one space, in one kind of festival. So I'm really fascinated to see how it kind of comes together.
Cool. So are we.
I've got a question in the chat about talking a little bit more about how the curatorial rationale relates to Gertrude Street as a sense of place, and also about art in public space. Do you want to give your take on that first, Eleanor? I can probably jump in with a bit more about the history of Gertrude Street and stuff as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things I did was read, for all those interested, there's a really great like 30 odd page history of Gertrude Street. that is available. I can't remember what website it is, but it was really interesting to read about, you know, the buildings and the spaces that I'd seen as part of the festival, and the history of those particular spaces, and the history of resistance and different communities who sort of moved into Gertrude Street and made it their home. And I think that, you know, that relates in a way to this idea of wild spaces, but also, you know, radical softness. I think because there were sort of those discussions and those communities who were there and making it their own space. And they weren't always the powerful people. They were often, you know, disenfranchised or immigrant communities or, you know, First Nations communities as well. So I think that, to me, lends itself to Gertrude Street and its history. And I think the idea of public space being overtaken by something that is generally private is also quite interesting to me. As I said before, like, I'm interested in, we are a society that tends to value this idea of stoic. I'm just going to grin and bear it because that's my lot in life. And I'm not going to, I remember the first time I cried at work. This is going back years and years ago. And they were really quite awful. And I had gone upstairs and I remember thinking, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And then walked in to tell my boss what had happened, and then couldn't talk and just burst into tears. And I don't know, at the time, I don't know who was more horrified. Like, I don't know if I was more horrified that I was crying, or he was horrified because he was looking at this woman cry in a public space. Like, we both kind of didn't know what to do, which is it's not useful. So I think this idea of being able to bring those emotions to a public space and turn them into something that, you know, is political resistance and also, you know, strength and power, because there is strength in being vulnerable and having emotions. That, to me, is why I really wanted this sort of rationale to, go into that public space. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. I don't know if that was a bit...
No, it certainly did to me. For those of you who are out there that might be listening to this that know the festival but don't know the history of Gertrude Street, and the Gertrude Street has a very, very long history with Wurundjeri people. I've been on a couple of tours with Uncle Colin Hunter on the history of Gertrude Street, and it's great going more than one time because you always hear something different every time you wander down the street with Colin. And we do try to do that as an organisation every year or two, but there's also been an app that's just been developed called Yalangus, which actually has about 300 stories of place that have been recorded by Aboriginal elders in conjunction with Charcoal Lane and Mission Australia, etc. And that's it's an augmented reality app. It's a sound app, so you can actually walk down the street, and rather than just reading the plaques that are on the building about, you know, the first Aboriginal Health Centre or you know, the different places and the different, you know, the Stolen Generations Marker, etc., you actually hear in people's voices, you know, what was actually going on at the times, you know, in the 60s or earlier, or but there's a lot of history there. Fig Tree at the top end of Gertrude Street, right down to Smith Street and all the surrounding streets. There's also, one of our board members, and this is not Wurundjeri history, but one of our board members who lives on Gertrude Street and has an old shop front. It was the first feminist bookshop in Melbourne. Back in the 1920s or 1930s. I will give you that address, Eleanor, so you know which one that is.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
And she's got a lot of history on that building, I think, as well. So it's really great to know about some of that stuff. What else was I going to say? And yeah, there's obviously, like with the Housing Commission towers there. There's lots of history with different groups, culturally and linguistically diverse groups that have come through Gertrude Street over the years, and we work really closely with, you know, Yarra Youth Services and a lot of the youth that come through and live within the towers. So yeah, it's great to connect with all of them, because there is an artist in residence program also at Yarra Youth Services to connect in with those people and show some of their work on the street, which we haven't had the opportunity to do in 2021 because we've been in lockdown, but we're going to do that as a pop-up event, you know, a little bit later down the track.
Excellent.
Yeah. Wondering, are there any other questions out there? And thank you, team in the background who are like popping up, you know, all the Aboriginal history of Yarra links and Storyscape Yallinguth app links and that kind of stuff. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add about, you know, their thoughts for 2022, aside from the fact that we will be out of lockdown?
No, I'm excited. It's good to have it off the ground. It's been a long time sort of coming, which is good because it's meant more time for reading and mulling things over, which I quite like. But it's nice to kind of now be able to hit the ground running, and yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, we're delighted to be working with you. We're delighted to have this Curatorial Rationale. For all the artists out there that are wondering when they can have a good look at it and when they can apply, that'll be going live on our website at 7 o'clock tonight. So if you go to the opportunities page on either the Centre for Projection Art website or the GSPF.com.au, which is the Gertrude Street Projection Festival website, you'll be able to access that. There is going to be a bit of a long lead time. I should also mention that the Centre for Projection Art residencies are also going to be going live, and they've got about a 2-week opening time, and that this is the first time that we can open it across Australia, because one of the positive things that's come out of the pandemic is that we've learnt to deliver residencies and mentorships digitally, and Australia Council have provided us with some funding to support our residency program. So we now, it's not all of you who have wanted to be part of the residency, but you lived in a different state, you can now apply, so which is wonderful. So we thank Australia Council for getting on board with that. So yeah, that's all going to be live at 7 o'clock tonight, and all the key dates on when the decisions will be made, when the EOIs are due in, that's all there. Cool. Well, if anyone else doesn't, I have a note saying everything's open. Centre for Projection Art residency applications are open and GSPF applications are open. Thanks, team. You're amazing. So if anyone got anything else they want to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Cool.
Let's get your applications in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fantastic opportunity.
It is. Yeah. It is a great opportunity. And it's great. It gets better every year. The technology gets better every year. We've got great support from Epson and Looper players, so we can get some great tech out on the street to make the artworks look great. So yeah, please get on board, and happy to field any questions. So yeah, Eleanor, myself, Kat for the residency program, we're all happy to field questions. And I'm delighted to be working with Eleanor this year towards the next festival, and great to have Jody and Henry on board. Thanks, guys.